All right. Good morning. Just for another 30 minutes. We're going to be working on Gem Wars today. We're going to be implementing the identity server as well as the web API. And then we're going to set up the communication between those and the Unity project and retrieve our authorization tokens. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat or into the comments. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do is I want to show we're going to be implementing IdentityServer4, which looks like this. This is the documentation for it. There are 4 types of authorization flow that we can follow. Client credentials, which I don't think we're going to necessarily support unless I do something server to server. Resource owner password credential, which means that you put in a username and password. We're not necessarily going to be doing that. I have to look and double check. And then the other ones are implicit, which is for a web application, so that one is non-applicable. And the 4th one is, it's not PKCE. I'm trying to remember what it is. 4 auth types. We're going to say OAuth protocol flow. Oh, and the other one is authorization code, which has something in the middle, which is like a unique code to make sure that it's coming from the correct location. So we're going to be using IdentityServer4, and we're going to be implementing it from scratch. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Okay, so in my startup, we're going to be using Entity Framework here as my ORM. I'm always tempted to, we're probably going to put the game objects up on DynamoDB, which is the NoSQL MongoDB equivalent that's provided by Amazon Web Services. That'll be for production. I think for testing, we'll just use a Mongo database that's in my closet. So here, we're going to have a new startup class, and it's going to have a startup configuration and then a configure services. And in here, we want to create, the first one is we need to add an identity context to this. So I'm going to create a new folder in here called, second. Let me look at this identity server thing because I have a boilerplate which is up on GitHub, and I feel like we could just use that. We need to add identity server, but then also this identity context, which comes out of, it's just an identity database context of type entity. So what I can do is I can do a services dot add database context. And that comes from the namespace Microsoft extensions dependency injection. So we can add that. And all this is an ASP.NET Core web app with no with nothing added to it. We'll add the using up here. And if this doesn't work, we're just going to move over to my boilerplate. Right, so it's a pain in the butt to get this thing set up. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to github.com and go to my profile. And on here, I have a publicly available repository. I'm here, says the Fallen Hope of running around, and right here, Identity Server for Angular.NET Core Web API boilerplate. And we're just going to download this as a zip. It makes it a little easier. I don't need it in source, it's already there. And here it is. And so now I'm going to look at my project, which is this one. Let's remove this. And then I want to jump into the, don't save that. we're going to open this project in File Explorer, jump to my clients, and now over here I can bring in my backend clients called Identity. We also have landing and WebAPI. We'll probably use the WebAPI one as well. And I'm just going to bring this in over the top. Now this server was initially set up for the monitor, so we're going to change the name of everything throughout the project. So let's go ahead and open this solution back up. Looks like I already have it open. So here we can add an existing project, and we're going to add this one. And I'm going to change this name to be called phs.gemwars.identity. Okay, so in this, the first thing that I want to do is we're going to update everything. Well, let's make sure it builds. Crystallizes says, I lost my motivation to code. What happened? You're a coder in real life, or not in real life, but like for your day job, right? So do you mean on the side or at work too? Is it getting older? Okay, this is saying that it wants to have some projects that I don't have reference to, which is fine because they're not here. And then we'll rebuild this. Okay, this time domain does not exist. So this is wanting my, oh, this is interesting. This needs some fixing. So in my notepad, I need to say fix my boilerplate. But this is fine for us. So in here, the first thing that I need to add is this user manager of type identity. And this is sign-in manager of type identity. That's a type of T user. Oh, this is the wrong one. We want to get rid of the identity model. So it looks like this needs to have on it a entity framework. Let's just comment out this accounts controller for now and try to rebuild it. Okay, cool. So here we have our seed data, and this is going to be called a identity DB context. And then this one we're going to get a identity, right? Because the user manager wants a type of T user, which is just a class. That seems really, really generic. Both my projects currently suck. Do you need stuff to do? I mean, hell, we could have you do stuff for this if you want. And here we're going to add this as a username to be admin. Just 1 second here. I need to see what this identity is. It's an identity user is what it's called in the newest framework. I have to update my Git on this one. This should be cleaner. Okay. Yeah, the dog is going nuts. And then here, same thing. Identity user. And the same thing here. identity user, and the same one here, identity user. Okay, we're going to add this and add my username as admin. And the email will be, this is called Gem Wars. And I think, let me check one thing real quick, please. I want to make sure that's available. One more second. It's this. This is going to be admin at gemwarsgame.com. And now, you are working on your website. So the website has the newest version of the game, Crystallizes. If you want to go play it, it's just for free. I'd love your feedback. Anything that you could tell me. I have a versus the computer mode and then a free play mode. And then I'm getting ready to start on the multiplayer aspect of it. So that's why we're implementing this identity server. And then we're going to add in a custom grant, a custom flow for it. So that way we can handle Google coming from the Unity game. So in this, we need to set a password. And since this is just local, I'll just do password 1 with an exclamation point. And here we're going to set the role to be admin. And we're going to say that this is Gem Wars Game and Gem Wars Game. And that's it. And then this is going to seed the rest of the data. So that looks right. So in startup, this is going to be a identity database context. And we're going to pass in here my connection string. So we need to grab a connection string for this. So let me do that. We'll use this one here. And we're going to call this phs.gemwars.identity. And it's going to pass in a identity type of an identity user and an identity role. Password leaked. Yeah, well, I'm going to put this back up here because there's too many errors going on. So this has to get corrected on the Git. This should be cleaner. Okay? And then we're going to add the controllers with views, add our Razor pages, and then we're going to add the Windows display option and start our identity server. And then we're going to add an identity to the identity server called identity user. And here we're going to pass in for the configuration store our connection string again. And then same thing for our operational store. Here, this is for my signing certificate if I'm not in development. So this is something we're going to worry about once this gets hosted. And then down here, this is for my individual account providers like Google, Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft. But we don't need those. So that should be it to set up our identity server with Entity Framework. This is in my config. So we forgot to change this other file in here called config. And this has 3 types of resources. The OpenID, since we're using OpenID config. We're also going to request potentially a profile and then also roles. So this is our scope down here, and we're going to say this is phs.gemwars.webapi for the scope name, and then also for what we're going to reference it in the app. And we're going to request profile, roles, and this one is going to be the same as this one. And then here in my secret, we can just do a fake secret, because this is never going to go public with this secret. And we're going to add all of these things later to a project that we're going to inject, since we're going to need these in multiple places. And now down here, these are my clients. So currently I have one for an Angular client. I don't need anything from that Angular client. And we should be able to build it. Now we're going to pull up. Oh, come on. The back end from this. Okay, so in my I think this built. We got 3 more errors on my login page, because this is different now. We're not going to have these register a new account, forgot username, forgot password. We're not even going to have this form, and we're going to disable all of these forms in a little bit. Okay, so let's build this. And now that that's done, we're going to create my database. And I'm going to do a update database, and I just know these from doing this a lot of times. Application database context. Let me make sure that my GemWars. Did I ever try using Writer? I have not. I know a lot of people who use Writer, and they say really positive things about it. It makes me think I should try it. I like Visual Studio Code a lot. I like the command kind of style, which I feel like is missing a little bit here. So it looks like I need to add in my context. So we're going to add in here a new class called a application database context. And we're going to make this a type of identity database context of a identity user. And in my startup, we need to change this to be a application database context. Run it again. So do I need to do a add migration first to my application DB context called init? Just one more second. Okay, so we're going to do this slightly different, where I'm going to do a override of my on model creating. And then, why do you ask, Crystallizes? Do you really like Rider? Tell me more. And then, in my entities under identity context, here we go. I want to actually do this for a protected override void on configuring, which accepts a DB context options builder. And here we're going to do a use SQL Server of my identity, which is this here. And then additionally, I want to have a separate controller in here for my application database context. Or a constructor, sorry, like that. And now that should be working fine, because now it's going to find the provider here. It is telling me that I forgot to do this new DB context options. So let's look up here. And I want to say what's going on with my cable? We want to say a create DB context with options parameterless constructor. It's like this. So we'll just do this, and then we can remove this. Options builder dot options. There. That should work. So now we're declaring this here. And let me go back and get rid of my migration and run it again. Oh, okay, so what this wants me to do, I misunderstood. Okay, so what this is telling me is that when I instantiate this one, right, so this would never be used. For the database context. We are doing that. So let's try it one more time. Okay, we're going to go ahead and search on Google for this, because I haven't seen this. This must be a new thing. I'm using JetBrains IDE for all kinds of languages nonstop. I'm mainly using Java for most of the stuff, but using C# obviously for Unity. I love their IDEs and really dislike Visual Studio. Code is awesome. Yeah, I like Code. Visual Studio is kind of slow. Messy, interesting. Maybe I should give the JetBrains IDE a try. Writer's free from JetBrains, right? So it's just saying I need to add this to my constructor. So we were close, like that. Okay, try it one more time. There we go. No, that's not going to work. And now we're going to open up SQL Server. And we can see that it's applied the migration for the right here. And just the identity tables. So the other two are scaffolded already here as configuration and persistent grant database. So update database/c configuration db context. And then the same one for the persisted grant db context. I probably don't even need this anymore, to be honest, because it's being handled here. We'll get rid of all that stuff in a few seconds. Okay, so everything ran. So now when I run this, it's probably going to be at the wrong host. Doesn't look like it did anything. So let's run it. As a browser to 5,000. Okay, told me that this is wrong, which is correct because it's now application DB context. And this is going to seed the database. And here we can change the monitor to be phs.gemmores. And we're going to add this .webapps to it. Okay. Let's rebuild this. Now it's saying that I've got an error in my error page, which is this. It wants me to switch this to web host environment. We're just going to set this to null. Like that. Okay, so that time we got no errors and everything built successfully. So when I run this, okay, this is saying that it can't find identity database context in my user manager. So back over here, application database user looks right. This is application database context. And we'll try it again. Hey, Greg Gamer. I've been great. It's good to have you back with us, man. How are you? You checked out the demo of GemWars? It's free up on the website. Cool. Now we can look at our discovery document and we can see that everything is running successfully. Now we need to add our provider for Google in here because we're going to be doing this from a game instead of a web app. So let me pull up this project. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start kind of going through this. The first thing I want to do is I want to add a provider called a Google Grant Validator. And when I look at this, I want to have a constructor which is going to pass in a configuration database context. And actually, before I do this, I'm going to make a copy of this project so that I can provide the updated version of it to the get. And we'll just put this right here on the desktop. And great, where is this? We'll have to look at it. Okay. I also want to add in my application database context and my user manager of my identity user. And that's it. And then we're going to add a protected read-only configuration database context called configuration database context, a read-only application database context, and a user manager of my identity user called user manager. And then we're going to assign these. Now, since we're going to add this as a new provider, this needs to inherit from iExtension grant validator. And it's going to have a string called grant type, which we're going to call Google. And this interface, no problem. Let me know what you think. I'm really, really curious. I'm implementing any and all comments from the project. Everything goes into consideration. Almost everything gets implemented. The only thing that hasn't been implemented are abilities, and I was going to add those after I add in this stuff. And then we're going to add a 8-player player versus player concept with a so you're going to play as individual games to progress up through the ladder. Yes, that's the game, the Gem Wars game thing. Yep. So this is a public asynchronous. I also wrote the music for it yesterday. I haven't written music since I was a little kid, but it came out pretty good. I'm making it reactive, and we're going to import it, and then we'll probably make more music on stream for that. It's a little bit funny the way that the DAW works, and that the digital audio workspace, because it uses different devices, and to get it to output correctly from the keyboard, it's just going to take me a little bit to get it set up. So here we can implement this function that we need to add, which is called validate asynchronous. Thank you. I'm trying to now, seeing as I have all the time. What do you mean you have all the time? I'm gonna have to buy a new cable like this week. Okay. Okay, I see. So validate asynchronous. This needs to be an asynchronous function. And now what I want to do is I want to get some information out from the game that we're going to submit across. So the first thing I want to get is my client. And so what we're going to, this is like custom authorization. So when a device comes through and it makes the request, it's going to be submitting information that we're now going to parse out of the request. And then we're going to be verifying to make sure that everything matches what it should for the application. And then it's going to create the user. So we're going to make a new client ID here called a context.request raw, and we're going to get the client ID. And then I want to get the ID here, which is a context.request.raw.get of the ID, and a username, which is a context.request.raw.get username, and then the authorization code, which we're going to receive in the Unity game. So we're going to do this with authorization flow. I'm not even busy. What does that mean? Everything all right? All right, so now if my string dot is null or white space of my client ID, or my string is null or white space of my ID, or my string is null of white space of my username, then we're going to do a context.result equals a new grant validation result called a invalid grant. Now I want to get the client, okay? So we want to do a client equals my new configuration database context dot clients, and we want to get my first or default asynchronous, where my client ID dot trim dot toLower is equal to my client ID dot trim dot toLower. And so if my, and we don't actually need these, it should be exactly the same. So if my client is equal to null, then I want to do a context.result is a new grant validation result called invalid client. Now we're going to do a try and a catch. I could be on this for a while. I love games like this. That's awesome. If you have any input, let me know. We can make the changes. And then I think the multiplayer is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited for the multiplayer. Now what I want to do is I want to get my application user. So we're going to do a, first we're going to check if the ID has been logged in the server. So we're going to get the application user here of my first or default asynchronous, where my Google ID token is equal to my ID that we're passing across as a SHA-256. So this, we need to add a new model in here called a application user, and that's going to be a identity user, and we want to add a string on here for my Google ID token. And then back in startup, we're going to say that this is an application user. I think an online mode will be really fun. I think people could enjoy this game a lot. That's exciting. That makes me happy, man. Okay, so that looks good. It's encouraging. All right. And then anywhere else where you have a user manager, we want to change this to be an application user. Okay, so now this one, online modes in games is difficult. So there's a free mode, Crystallizes, so you can just play. There's one where you can play against the computer, and the AI is, I could have made it more crazy, but I tried to like keep it reasonable. So I'm really interested in feedback on that. And then I'm gonna add like a competitive mode, which you don't have to play if you don't want to play. You know what I'm saying? That's not for everyone. I don't really play a lot of competitive games. I would say it's amazing. Thanks, man. I made all the graphics, and then I wrote music for it yesterday. All that's on stream, up on the YouTube. You can check out all the videos here. Oh, the site of implementing it. Yeah, that's what we're going to be doing here. It's going to be fun. It doesn't have any like real-time stuff. I'm going to do it with the identity server to authorize, and then I'm going to offload that to a TCP server, and I'm just going to do it all through TCP. That's kind of the plan. And so now when I look at my application database context, this one needs to be an application user. And we'll just look to see if this is anywhere else. Application user. Application user. Application user. There it is. Okay, so back over here in our validator. Now I've got my application user by my Google ID token. So if my application user equals null, we want to do another try, and we're going to say a check to see if the ID token is valid. We had to look at it through your YouTube channel, all the development. That's why I came today. Oh, awesome! Thanks. I haven't put the regular photos up for it or the descriptions of the videos, so I'm lagging a little bit on that. So now what I want to do is I want to get my valid payload, and that's going to come from a Google JSON web signature. And this comes from Google API's auth. All right. Thanks, Crystallizes, for hanging out. Make sure you come back soon. Always great to have you here. Okay. And now what I want to do is I want to get my application database context users, and we're going to look for the one where the first or default asynchronous and I want to get the one where the Google ID token is equal to my valid payload.subject. And we want to await on that. So now if my application user is not null, now we're going to set some properties on here. And we're going to do my application user.google avatar URL, which we'll add to that, is a valid payload.picture. And then we also want to get the email. And the Google ID token is my ID.toSha 256. And we'll figure out why it's doing this other check here in just a minute. My application user.google username is username. And the application user.user type is a user type.google. And then we're going to set the state of that to modified. And now if it can't save that, then we're going to set the result here to be a new grant validation result of a invalid request and return. So here what we're going to do is else I want to create the user here. And this is going to be a application user equals a new application user. And on this, I want to add in here a string for my Google avatar URL and my string for my Google username, and then the user type, which we haven't defined yet. And in here I'm going to create a new class called enums, and I'm just going to have a public enum user type, which is just going to be Google. So now down here when we create this, we're going to say the username equals username. My Google Play ID is my valid payload dot subject. And this is changing it. Interesting. So I wonder why I initially did this, but there's definitely a reason for it, where I'm storing it as an ID, and if not, then it goes in as a valid payload. And then I create it as a valid payload down here. So this is email equals valid payload dot email. Google avatar URL equals valid payload dot picture. Google ID token equals ID dot to SHA 256. Google username equals username, and my user type equals Google. So here's the difference. This one is a Google Play ID. Like that. And now what I want to do is this little loop. Check to make sure the username isn't already in use. This is not the username for the game. So we're going to do a do and a while here. And what I want to do is a concat username, which is my username plus my index plus plus equals 0. Then we want to say string.empty. Otherwise, it's going to be a index.toString. And then I want to create the user.username equals a concat username. So what this is doing is it's only going to append a number at the end of it if the username is not able to be created, which we're going to say if it is awaiting the user manager.create async of my application user dot succeeded. And I want to do this after this is completed, like that, to say if it didn't complete. And now, after all this, if my application user is equal to null, then my context.result is a new grant validation result of my token request errors dot invalid request. That's awesome, Great Gamer. If you have problems with it on the web, let me know and I can get you in on the APK. And then we'll return. Now, all the way back up here at the beginning, if you were not able to get the application user, I want to do an else, and we're going to do a check the authorization code here. Because I remember this because Unity will give me one or two of these things, one of the two. So we'll have another try catch. And here we're going to say the flow is a new Google authorization code flow. And we want to do a new initializer where we sent my client secrets to a new client secrets. And my client ID is a we're going to say this is my Google Web App Client ID. And I'm going to come in later and I'm going to fill this. And this is my Google Web App Client Secret. And then my scopes is a new array of my Google Web App scope. And we'll go look at those because we have to define those still for our API. I think I should work on something. That's no problem. I think I should work on something like this myself. I've been actually thinking about it since looking at yours. That's awesome. That's awesome. If you have any suggestions on this one as well, I mean, we can always throw them in there. If interested, I mean, you can help out. I don't know. We'll figure it all out as we go. Okay, my response here is awaiting my flow, and we're going to exchange my code for a token. And we're going to pass in here a user ID, an auth code, nothing for the redirect URL, and a cancellation token.none. So if my response is not null and the string is not null or white space of my response.access token, now what I want to do is we're going to have a new service here called a new OAuth2 service. Which comes from Google API's OAuth version 2. Yeah, no problem. And in this, we're going to make a new initializer. And then we're going to have a request is my service.token info. And we're going to set the access token to my auth code. And then we're going to execute asynchronously this request. So if my info is null or my string is null or white space of my info.audience, then my context.result is a new grant validation result called a token request errors.invalid request. And then we'll return. And now underneath this catch, if my application user does not equal to null, then we can finally return my context.result is a new grant validation result, which is a application user.id and my grant type, and return. And if all of this fails, we'll do a context.result equals a new grant validation result to do an invalid request. So what this does is it first checks to see if the ID is being sent across in the payload. And if it is, then it checks to make sure the application user is updated. Otherwise, it creates the first one. But sometimes it will send an authorization token. So when that happens, I want to exchange that token for a user ID. And then I'm going to make sure that that is valid. So this happens if it's a new this is a first time logging in user. And this one is a returning user who has already registered with the server. Okay. And now to get this all going in my startup, okay, I'll have to see what's going on with that. Just a second. Here we want to do a add extension grant validator of my Google grant validator that I just created. And because I am hosting on Nginx, if I don't provide the updated forwarding headers, I need this logic. which would be a options dot issue or URI equals my http://localhost 5000, and my options.public origin equals http://localhost 5000. And that should be it. So back in the database, let's go ahead and delete this identity server. And we're going to make it now, again, with all the tables and all of... Oh, we need to do our seeded data. So let's look at that. We have our config here, which is all set up with our API secret. Let me go make sure that this is all correct. Okay, we're going to say that this is my scope. So let's add a new class in here. And I'm going to call it globals. And in this, I want to have a public constant string called my WebAPI scope. And we'll just set it to that. And then we also want to have one for my public constant string called WebAPI secret. If I need this, I'm not sure I need this yet. I have not been a game developer for very long. I'm still learning. This would be a good game for me to try doing. Yeah, it's not too bad. It's pretty simple. A lot of times the mechanics in games can be really simple, and then the implementation has to be solid, right? So this is globals dot that. And now in my get clients, I want to make a couple. And the first one is going to be for this client is the Unity game. And we're going to say my client ID here is my client ID. So we want to have another one here called a WebAPI scope. Just 1 second here. Yeah. Okay. So this is going to be my globals.WebAPI client ID. And my allowed grant types, we're going to add in my public const string called WebAPI grant type Google, and we're going to say that that's Google. My allowed scopes are going to be a identity server constants dot standard scopes called OpenID. The profile, my globals dot scope, and also we're going to add in here roles. And require client secret equals false. One thing I'm thinking about is if I want to make this PKCE. I don't think it matters. No, it shouldn't, because it's completely custom valid grant type. Okay, our next client is my admin client ID. And it's going to be called a the same thing. But with admin at the end. And this one we do want to have a client secret. Of my globals dot web API admin secret. Dot SHA-256. My allowed grant type for this one is a grant types dot resource owner password. And my allowed scopes are going to be a identity server constants dot standard scopes dot OpenID. Hey there, Cozy Kubu. Thank you for that follow. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put them into the chat. Appreciate it. An identity server constants here of standard scopes dot profile. And another one, call my global dot scope and roles. This client is for accessing the API as an admin from a dev machine. Okay. In my startup, or in my program, I want to have my ensure seed data. And in my seed data, I want to have here a public const string called admin username, like that. And then we want to have another one here, which is a admin email. And then another one here for admin password. And then if this all works okay, then we're going to go down here, set this to be my webmaster. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. So that should be all we need. So let's update our migrations. Good. We need to do a add migration for my application database context, and we want to put my output directory to the data / migrations / come on, break out. Okay. Database migrations, and we want to say that this is my application database. There it is. And now I can do my update database, application database. The configuration database, or the persisted grant database, and then the configuration database. And then we can run it. And here we can see identity server is running. And you can see our authorization endpoints and my supports are GWAPI. So we're good to go there. So the next thing we want to do is create a web API. And this one is another web project. And I'm going to add it here in clients. I'm going to call it phs.gemwars.webapi. And I just want to do it as an API project, configured for HTTPS and enabling Docker. Okay, so let's take a look at this project. We don't need this default stuff, although we can leave it for a little bit just so we don't mess anything up. And when I start this, the first thing I want to do is Wrong one. The first one is here. We want to add a new application database context for this one, which is a database context. And we want to install Entity Framework Core. And so now here I can do a services dot add database context, and it's going to be a type of application database context, and we're going to pass in these options here. And up in identity under startup, I'm going to grab this string and I'm going to move this to globals. Identity, no, connection, string, identity. And this one is just connection string. Come on, computer, don't die on me. Okay, we want this one. Let me check something really quick. Good. So now here, I want to say my options.use SQL server. And we want to pass in my globals dot. Now what we need to do is create a new solution called domain. And I'm going to create a new project, which is going to be a class library in .NET Core C#. I'm going to make it right here, and I'm going to call it phs.gemwars.variable domain.variables. And now I can move all of these things out of this globals class down to this class, which we can call globals. Let's change all of these to be A1 Nievo. How are you doing? Thank you so much for that follow. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to pop them into the chat. I want these to be read-only, right? Hey, I am the Bull 5. How are you doing? Thank you as well for that follow. Very much appreciate it. Again, guys, if you have any questions, thank you again. So it's not telling me that I can do this as a interface, which is really what I want. So we'll just do it manually. I'm going to rename this called globals. And then I want to say that we're going to have an iGlobals. And there's a reason for this. Like this. Scope, client ID, secret. Admin client ID, admin secret. Admin username, admin email, admin password. Grant type, connection string, connection string. And so now in globals, we can implement iGlobals. Okay, we'll add in the gets here. And then we'll dump that. That should clean everything up. And now over here in startup, when we're starting my services, I want to do a services.add transient, and it's going to be an iGlobals, and it's going to be globals. Like that. Now you can say var globals equals new globals again, so that we can both inject it and use it. This one we want to do the same thing, services.add transient, iGlobals and then globals. And then we'll have a var globals equals new globals again. And this makes it really easy to transition from production to dev. By having this, I just change which one I inject. And use SQL Server comes from install package Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.SQL Server. So let me look at my solution manager. I don't need this one. Hey there, Shahey. How are you doing? Shay, hey. Thank you so much for that follow. Appreciate it. If you have any questions when I'm working on, please don't hesitate to put them into the chat. We're going to up all those in just a second. Consolidate doesn't have anything, so if I look at my installed for Microsoft Entity Framework Core, this one, that one, and this one, we want to update these to the most recent. So let's go to Update and select everything and do a update. Hey, Demo. How are you doing, man? Welcome back. Been playing the game a few times now. My girlfriend had a bug where the screen just turns gray and the game stops playing about 30 to 45 minutes of gameplay. Is that on a cell phone demo or is that on the computer? Hey, Shahey, can you elaborate on identity server? Sure. No, on Windows. Okay, thank you. I'll log that and we'll find out what it is. Is it when you're playing against the computer or when you're doing free play? Identity Server provides authorization services. OAuth is a pretty standard protocol for making sure that the person that you're communicating with over the servers is who you intend for them to be. So the four protocols is resource, password, owner credentials, authorization flow, client credentials, and what's the other one? Authorization code. And then there's also PKCE. So I'm setting up a custom grant to work with Unity, and so I use Unity to grab a authorization code from Google. I pass that to the identity server. We have a custom provider in here, which then verifies that that authorization code is valid with Google, and then it returns a access code that's valid for the API. Oh, yes, I was thinking it was sort of a server for the game. Exactly. No one went. Okay, I gotta fix that demo because that's not the first time I've heard that. So I will look at that. Is that when you're playing against a player or when you're playing against the computer? So now when I look here at my Entity Framework SQL server, this one, we're going to add this onto the web API. AI, okay. $30 to 45 minutes. But it's cool you guys are playing it. That's what's really cool. So I got to get that bug fixed. No problem. So here in ensure seeded data, we're now going to pass in an iGlobals called globals. There we go. This should fail here. And to get this, we're going to do a host.services.getService, which is a type of iGlobals. And then I want to cast that to a iGlobals. That's awesome. My wife enjoys them too. She was the one who encouraged me towards it. But now I gotta fix that. I gotta figure out where that's occurring. We will, though. Interesting. These things must be old. So in my view, in my quick start, we want to do a IdentityServer4. How do I create quick start? It says I can just download this. So let's do a download zip. And then we're going to open this up. If I look at my quick start, I wanna copy this stuff real quick because I think that's the only thing I've changed. Yeah, so we're gonna delete quick start and views. And bring them back in. And then in root, I just want to bring in this stuff. And she doesn't like the colors you picked for the game. Which colors is that? The colors for the background or the theming? Did she like it better when it just had the black screen? The colors for the gems? Is this your own game, or is the Identity RPG game released on Steam? No, I'm building a game called Gem Wars. It's available to play up at my website, https://pixelhorrorstudios.com. I'll link the site. We are creating the authorization server so that people are able to play multiplayer. A Fallen Hope says, BRB. The colors for the tiles themselves, the gems themselves are fine. Interesting. I've had people tell me they hate the gems, but not the tiles. Okay, so she doesn't like the pastels. What colors? Oh, Carlos told me that too. What colors would she like to see? Okay, and now in here, we want to pass in globals, called globals. And the same thing here. And here in ensure seed data, I want to pass in a iGlobals called globals. And then we'll pass that in right here. And you could just do this as a scope dot service provider dot get required service iGlobals. And then you don't even need to pass it in there. She'll check in the game again and probably provide a couple hex codes. Awesome. Yeah, if I would need hex codes, 2 of them for the gradients, right? Because there's 2 different gradients and I need 6 colors. So here we're going to say var globals equals that. And then we can pass this in here and everywhere else, and we should be good. Perfect. Okay, so back here on our startup class, we've added the SQL Server. And now we have our, well, MVC I don't need. Let's do a JWT security token handler. And we want to do a default inbound claim type map.clear. Well, now she's back stuck playing the game. No problem. If it happens again, let me know. But definitely people have been telling me it, but it's very rare. It's awesome that you guys like it. That's awesome. I probably need a leaderboard up there, right? Probably pretty quick. Okay, we're going to do a services.add authorization. And we're going to add an authorization options with a policy called admin. And we want to say that the policy has a requirements of a new claim requirements of a new key value pair of a string and a string called role and admin. This is a claim requirement. So in here, I'm going to add a new class called a claim requirement, which is going to have it's going to inherit authorization requirement, and it's a key value pair of a string and a string for my claim. And we want to do this as a private set. Like that. She likes the colors, just not the bright yellow ones. What I would add for the AI is either a setting to set the time the AI takes to make a turn or difficulty settings. Yeah, I was going to add difficulty so that it starts slower and then it starts to speed up. And then I was also going to add it so anytime you place a piece, you gain points, because otherwise you can be very patient and take advantage of it. I don't understand what is wrong here. What is this talking about? Bizarre. Okay, so now that that's done, I want to add a singleton of my authorization handler for that new authorization claims requirement handler. And this is one we need to create here, a claims requirement handler. So let's make a new class. Called a claims requirement handler. And this wants to be a authorization handler of my claim requirement, which should make me implement handle requirement. And I also want to have my iGlobals in here and have that as a constructor called iGlobals globals. So here what I want to do is I first want to get my access token. Well, no, I first want to get my discovery endpoint. Of my globals.IdentityServer. Authority URL. And this should include identity model, right? Isn't that like a new HTTP client or something like that now for the newer version? And then it like get discovery document asynchronous. And you want to do this of my globals.IdentityServer authority URL. And then what I want to do is I want to get my token is my context.user.claims.toList, and we want to get the first one, which is equal to the type access token. So if my token does not equal null and my string is not null or white space of my token.value, then I want to do a response equals my await, and it's called disco.get user info asynchronous, which is going to pass in a new info request, and it wants my token. And now if my response is not null, then I want to do a role claims equals my response.claims, where my x.type.trim.toLower is equal to my requirement.claim.key.trim.toLower.toList. And if my role claims dot any x where my value dot type dot trim dot to lower is equal to my requirement dot claim dot value dot trim dot to lower. Then you want to do a context dot succeed requirement. And all of this is so that I can have endpoints that will be specific for my admin account. Okay, so now after all of that, I want to do a services.add authentication, and it's going to be for a bearer token. And this time I want to add my identity server authentication. And so for this one, we need to add install package IdentityServer4.access token validation. And now I do a like that. And so now my options, I want to do my authority is equal to my globals dot identity server authority and my options.require HTTPS metadata is false. My options.api name is my globals.WebAPI scope. And my options.jwt bearer events are my new JWT bearer events. And that's going to be onTokenValidated is this function called onTokenValidated, which we need to add. And then we add our controllers, and that's it. Okay, hold on one second. Use developer exception page is good. We want to do a app.use forwarded headers for this is for Nginx. We don't need redirecting. I don't need static files. I do want routing. I do want authentication. I do want authorization. So I need authentication as well. And then my routes. Okay, the last one we want to do is this protected virtual task called onTokenValidated. And this takes in a token validated context. So if my context.security token is a JWT security token, and my context.principal.identity is a claims identity, then we're going to add my claim here, which is the access token, because we need to return that to the game. Like that. Okay, we can delete these two. The next one that I want to add in here is we're going to add in, well, I don't need to do that yet. We need to implement my public string identity server authority URL, which is a GET, and that's going to be an http://localhost 5000. Our Kolka says use authentication should go before use authorization. Thank you. Very good catch. I very much appreciate that. Because the pipeline order does matter. And now what I can do is I can run my two projects. And I also want to add in here a okay, let's go here. We're going to say add swagger ASP.NET Core because I just want to make sure I get the right package. So now I'm going to install package here swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core. Okay, and now up here, I'm going to do a services.add_swagger_gen. And then in my configure down here, I can do a app.useSwagger. And then a app.useSwagger_UI. And then we will start the project as an IIS Express, and we want to go to my Swagger. And this one, we also want to start it as a IIS Express. Give it a run. Looks like it's starting from Docker. Yeah, see, it started from Docker here. But that's not going to be able to find the database because it can't start from Docker. Try it again. Just had it happen again. Ah, crap. All right, I'll add some logging so that way I'll be able to figure it out. We want identity and web API. Okay, we had the same issue as before. So in this application database context, I need to have a constructor which passes in a base of the DB context options. Sent you an uncaught error via Discord. Oh, hell yeah. I'm gonna use in operator for search. Yeah. Okay, so here the discovery document's working. And if I look at my Swagger, looks like that I need to add in right here the endpoint c dot swagger endpoint of my swagger v1 swagger.json, and we're going to say that this is called Gem Wars Web API. Thank you, demo. I really appreciate that. Okay, and now we'll go back and look at the Swagger, and it loaded, which is great. Okay, the last step of this would be to, in the Unity game, to get this set up. So we'll just do this very quickly. In my title manager, we'll open this up. And I'm going to try doing this a little bit different than before. Now let's just do it the regular way, real fast. We'll do it with the coroutine, and then we can always try it with the asynchronous calls later. So what I want to do is, in my game manager, I'm just going to create a new function here. And we're going to do a protected virtual enumerator called get access token coroutine. And what I want to do is I want to get a path here to my http://localhost:5000/connect/token. And now I'm going to submit some form data. And we're going to add the client underscore ID, which is the admin client ID, and I want to say my form.add field is going to be called a grant type, and we're going to say it's Google, and we'll change that later. And then we want to do a add field here, and we want to do my ID, and we're going to just say this is going to be a fake ID for now. So a GUID.new GUID.toString. And then we also want to add in the scopes, which is called the GWAPI. And now what I want to do is, using a var www equals a new Unity Webrequest dot post. Sorry, it's not a new. And we want to do this to my path and my form. And then we want to return my send web request. And if it is a network error or it is a HTTP error, we want to log the error. Otherwise, I want to log the... We're going to make one new object in here, call it DTOs. And I need to add a new class called a token DTO. And in this, I want to have a string for the access code that I added, the int for the expires in, the string for the token type, and a date timestamp. We want to make this a public and have it be serializable. And then what I want to do here is I want to say my token is a Json Utility Dot from JSON. Token DTO. And we want to do that for my download handler dot text. So this one is actually for the WebAPI. This is for Google. So we're going to have another one down here, which is for admin. Client ID. Grant type is password. Form.Addfield Client Secret is this. We're going to pass across the username, which is admin, and the password, which is that. And now when we start this, we can do a start coroutine, get access token coroutine. You really feel confident that the API credentials are being shown on stream? Yes, I do. Because this is all just on my dev machine. Nothing's going to production with this setup. I have different setups for production. These are just made up things for this stream. Okay, we're going to attach this to Unity. I want to now, in my Solution Explorer, on my Identity Server Provider, we're going to break on my Validate Asynchronous, because this should fail when I run the game. Give it a second to start. Looks like I've got a couple of errors here. Was it not updating? Let's check this again. I definitely do not see that error. So let's just reload Unity. All right, demo, thanks for hanging out. We'll see you a little bit later. Come on, Unity. I guess while we wait, I can also open up my No, I can't. It's still, I'm waiting for it to load. There we go. Still says I got 2 errors. Let's see what it is now. It might be that's using. Yeah, that's all it was. So we'll attach it. Come on. Give it a second here. Okay, there we go. So back in Title Manager, we'll give it a run. Okay, it hit. We're going to check to see if this works. We send the request. That's server error, connect token. Invalid object identity claims. So I got some little error in here I got to work out. Let me give it one more restart. Try one more time. That's bizarre. So just real quickly, we're going to jump into GemWars identity and destroy it. Then I'll do a new update. Configuration database Come on. The persisted grant database context. And then the application database context. And we'll try it one more time. So the reason why this happened is because we need to rescaffold these. All three of these. Persistent grant. Okay. So we're going to do a add migration. It's called a persisted grant database context, and my output directory is going to be data migrations identity server persisted grant database. And we want to call it a init. Okay, I want to do the same thing for a configuration database. Okay, and then I want to do it one more time with the application database context. Okay, and now we'll do our 3 updates. Application database context first. Persisted grant database context. And then the last one is the configuration database context. Now it should all work. Start it up. This time I can see the discovery document. And now in Unity, when I run this, we send the request. Says it's not a network error, it's not an HTTP error. It looks like it gave me a token. So it never even went through the Google validator, which is perfect. So it worked, and it did give me my access token here. And so that means that we're authenticated as a admin user. And now we're going to do one final thing. which is I'm going to have a get here in this controller. I'm just going to make a new controller and I'm going to call it a demo. Okay, and I want to give this the authorized tag. And all I want to have here is a public asynchronous task of an action result called get data. And I want to make this an HTTP get. And all I want to do here is return an OK of null. And so now when we do our test, I'm going to do this one more time now. And this one's going to be a get. And the path is going to be this demo. Second. Yeah, like that. And now I want to get that on my path. And I want to set the timeout to be 0, the request headers to be a content type of application JSON. And then we want to do another set request headers of my authorization. And this is going to be my bearer token that we just received. So up here we're going to say string token equals nothing. Token deserialized. And then we'll do a yield return www.send web request. And then we're going to just check to see what happens after that. We'll attach this to Unity. Give it one more test. Okay, we're going to get the token, which we got. And then we're going to hit the API, which says my www is null. We're going to say that the route here is get data. And it might be because this is using the HTTPS. So let's check it again. Unauthorized. It still says that it's null, which doesn't make sense. Try it again. Okay, got the token. Now it's not null. We set the request. It says it's HTTP error, and the error is 404 not found. Okay, we'll restart this one more time. I feel like the only thing that you're not doing is setting your paths. Says it's another error. Unauthorized. Almost done here. Unauthorized. Why would that be unauthorized? Let me check. No, it's doing it over HTTPS. That should be fine. If I look at where this thing is coming across here, API name. I feel like that's what the problem is if I look at my my config, why would that be giving me unauthorized? Is it because this needs to go above this? Let's get rid of this stuff for now and restart it. Oh, it's down here in my onToken validated. Let's check that. Run it one more time. Says it's an error again. Unauthorized. We're going to quickly look at this IdentityServer4 document and look at where they implement the app. It looks like it's doing it a little different here. We're going to try this really fast. We're going to change this to be, oh God. IdentityServer4 documentation. Okay, I'm going to try it a different way. We're going to do services.add open ID connect. After we do add authentication, add open ID connect. So we want to add in here on the WebAPI, install package Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. It's under, let's uninstall that. And I want to do a install package Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authentication.OpenID Connect. We're just going to call it OIDC, and then we'll do a options, and we can say my options.authority is my http://localhost 5000. Which is this. We can say my options.client ID is globals.web admin client ID, and my options.client secret equals my globals.WebAPI client secret. And my options.save tokens equals true. Let's try that. Oh, I have to get rid of this one. Hello again. So I want to show the changes that I needed to make to get the identity server to work correctly. So if I look here on my identity server, the first one is that I was using an older version of identity server. So the current version which is available is 4.0.2. And that changed a little bit the back end. So if I look at the config file, I had to include this new section called Get API Scopes because now the scopes are separated. And then additionally, I had to change an API resources, and I had to specify this as a scope. And this was working successfully. So now, the other thing that I did is on the front end, I am now using the add identity server authentication. And the other problem we were having is that this API name was not registering correctly as the audience in the JWT token. And that is because of identity server in the config file. I needed to have the secret, this allowed grant up here. I needed to have my scope set like this instead of using the overload for user claims. That added this API resource to the audience, which allowed this to retrieve the token and authorize successfully. One other thing that I changed is on my app itself, it looks like I'm using a JWT token. However, I could be using a reference token. And the reason for that is by having this secret here. And then in the web API, I could have a introspection here. But we're using the JWT token because otherwise I have to get caching working correctly, and that's something that is not currently going. So that is the changes that we needed to get identity server and web API working with our app.